Hello, everyone. My name is Leonard Paul, and I am the director slash, main instructor for the School of Video Game Audio. And you can find us at sovga.com. And joining us today is Doug Walters, who's an associate sound designer for Hexany Audio, and he was previously a student at the school. And we're just going to do basically a 15-minute sort of intro from him, describing a bit of his background, how he, started into the industry and sort of what's going on. And then in the remaining around half an hour ish, plus, then we can ask questions. So if you go to the live event chat at the side, then you can type your questions there, and then I'll ask Doug those questions directly. So yeah, there you are. Take it away, Doug.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to just go ahead and start my little timer to keep track of how long I'm talking.
Mhm.
Um, so, yeah, I am Doug. I'm an associate sound designer at Hexany Audio. And so thought I would start a little bit talking about what Hexany is and what I do there, and then circle back and explain how I got here. Um, so, Hexany is an audio outsourcing company. Um, There's 22 employees now, I think, 21,
Wow.
somewhere around there. And we work predominantly on video games. 99% of what we do is for video games. And about half the company is music and half is sound design. And I am on the sound design team. And uh, what that means is we are involved at varying degrees of depth in the actual game development itself. So, uh, game development companies, or either big AAA companies or indie developers, will come to us looking for audio for their game. And in some instances, they basically just send us some videos of animation and we create assets for the game that they then implement themselves. In other cases, um, we are fully involved in the actual development of the sound and then the actual implementation into the game itself. There are two technical audio designers at Hexney who are the folks who are focused on working in Engine, working in Wise, in Unreal, and Unity, etc. Um, and I think there are 8 sound designers, or maybe that's 8 with the technical. I don't really remember. But so I am a sound designer, meaning predominantly what I do is create sound effects for the video games, like character abilities or ambient environmental sounds, or UI sounds like the user interface when you click to start the game or when you hit pause or what have you. Um, and Hexney is we do a lot of mobile games. We do console and big release stuff. Um, we do a lot of PC games. We've done some VR. So it's a lot of variety in what I work on and what the company does. So my background was that um, I've been playing music forever, writing music since I was in high school. I interned at music studios when I was in high school, played in a lot of bands, went to college, studied music composition there. Um, and when I had interned at music studios in high school prior, it was actually largely a composition studio. So I had some experience writing music for TV through that, kind of going into college and then coming out, continued to have some connections from that. So I did a decent amount of composition for um, video, often digital YouTube promo videos, 2 minute long, Red Cross video
Mhm.
that just I would compose the music or something like that. Um, but so after college, I was playing in a band, touring, taking that very seriously, and was surviving as just an audio generalist, music composition, and also I got into doing a lot of like film audio on set, being the boom op. I did post production audio for films, so mixing indie movies and uh, just random freelance audio stuff while also doing some service industry stuff and just, you know, general chaos running doing sound for live venues. I kind of done a little bit of everything in terms of audio work.
Wow.
Um, all while playing in this band. Uh, the band kind of plateaued, but one of our songs got flipped into like a song I wrote became a DJ Khaled song, and then some rappers rapped on it. At that point, I decided to transition from playing in a band to trying to record other bands and write songs and being a music producer. And so then spent the next, I don't know, 6 years doing music production, um, and partnered with this weed paraphernalia company actually to open a music studio in
Hmm.
Hollywood and start a record label. And so for 5 or 6 years, um, after I moved to LA, I was running a music studio, recording, producing, writing songs, still doing random odd job, post production film work, um, and did some sound design stuff, but predominantly I was just recording, mixing, writing music.
Hmm.
And the pop music industry is pretty brutal, and your clients are often 20-year-olds, and
Aw.
you're who are inspiring and frustrating people.
Mm.
Um, as someone who had crossed the 30-year threshold, really when I started getting into this, uh, and uh, I I was successful to a certain degree in this pursuit. I had reached the Billboard charts a couple times as a songwriter and a producer,
Nice.
and um, was paying my rent through music for several years. Um, but I didn't reach a point of consistency or predictability, um, and uh, was there's a helicopter going by. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but
No, it's totally quiet.
Los Angeles helicopter lifestyle. Uh, but yeah, the music industry is just difficult. At least my experience in it, and I was focused on trying to be a songwriter and a producer, which
Mm,
wasn't the same as trying to just be a mixing engineer or a
mm,
recording engineer, where you can just have a stable sort of number of hours of clientele. And I found that the connection between the time I put into stuff and the financial benefit was very loose and
yeah.
random and outside of my control. And uh, during this time period, um, I think the real breaking point was that I produced a song for Trippie Redd, who's a rapper who's fairly successful. The album was, in the number 14 on the Billboard charts or something. And when it came time to negotiate the fee for having produced the song and written the hook,
Hmm.
it was just, comically low. And the next day I got up and saw a dude on Instagram Live burning $100 bills. And
Yeah.
I said, this is no longer the lifestyle that I think I want to lead into my waning years. So I I had a friend who had transitioned from being uh, a predominantly pop music guy into doing video game sound design and music, and he had stopped by my studio, I think, on his way to um, Game Sound Con,
Hmm.
and he had showed me Fmod and the interactive music system he had built, and uh, just sort of open. I had been playing a lot of video games, and I was into tabletop games. I was, a gamer.
Hmm.
I was aware and into nerd culture, but I hadn't really thought about the audio side of it. And when he opened my eyes to that, and I kind of decided that it was time to start trying to figure out how to get out of the rap game. Basically, I called him up and said, "Is this realistic? Could I make this happen? Do you think it's possible?" And he said, it could take a year, could take a little bit more, but video game audio like is an actual career path you can get into that would be potentially have a salaried lifestyle,
Yeah.
um, different from the sort of pop music freelance chaos, which is hard to get any kind of actual job. There's just not a lot of options in that regard.
Yeah.
So he broke it down for me. He was doing freelance for a long time, and then when I actually called him up to sort of ask about the transition, he had recently gotten hired at Power Up, which is in Vancouver, right?
Yeah. That's where the center is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so a handful of things that he told me early on, I just took them and ran. The first thing was he said, if you are looking for a salaried position, which I wanted to stop being freelance. I had been freelance my whole life.
Yeah.
Um, he said it is much more realistic to pursue sound design rather than music composition.
That's very true.
Um, yeah, there are fewer positions for sound design or for composition than there are for sound design.
Yeah.
Um, and he also suggested that if I was going to get into sound design, that I should learn Reaper, the DAW.
Mm-hmm.
I was using Logic predominantly. I had
Yeah.
familiarity with Pro Tools, but it was not what I was mostly using in my studio. Um, so I downloaded the free version of Reaper. I don't know if it's still free, but it's
It's
super affordable.
Yeah, it is free for download for as long as you basically want to use it. But and then as soon as you have money to pay for it, I think it's like $60 or something for like the basic version. It might be a bit more than that
Right?
now. They had
Which is
a pandemic version, but I think that they're
mm,
phasing out of that now. So
yeah, that's crazy cheap for
yeah,
such a powerful
yeah,
software.
yeah.
Um, and he also s- uh, suggested that I create a Twitter account that was focused on game audio, and uh, that I start doing redesigns, which is to say, take screen captures uh, or YouTube videos of gameplay or of video game cinematics, um, 5 to 15 seconds long, and redesign the audio. Just wipe out all the audio and design the audio. Um, and he pointed me towards Real Talk, ReelTalk, which is a Twitch uh, channel
Hmm.
on by Power Up actually, where they review people's reels and websites, and that was a very helpful resource for learning about the quality bar that I needed to hit in order to be viable.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so I kind of dipped my feet in the water a little bit, discovered that I found the sound design thing was pretty fun and satisfying. I was able to enter a flow state, working on sound
Hmm.
design, and it found it exciting, and I really liked being a part of video game stuff, because I was really into playing video games, and uh, so I went for it
Hmm.
and um, started doing a lot of networking online, networking in person.
Hmm.
I did go to Game SoundCon very early, and that's actually where I met Leonard. Um,
Hey, that's right.
and I think you probably recall, Leonard. I was like pretty green at that, and
Hmm. And also, I think that, if we rewind just like a couple, about a minute or so back in the conversation, it really was like I had that feeling of where you're just like, yeah, I'm so done with what I'm doing right now. Like I definitely had that feeling of where you're just like, yeah, I am, I can continue to do this thing and I'm good at it, but it's just not like, it's sort of like running on the fumes of just like, yeah, I'm I really need to like, basically switch track and do something different. And so, yeah, it was pretty cool because we basically talked to a table of people, and then I had another student there that I think he's Italian, and he
Hmm.
was able to also like answer your questions as well, because I think that helps too. Instead of me just going like, hey, the school that I do, and that's part of the reason obviously I'm doing this as well, is that it's I find it great for people that have actually done it, the school, to be able to say like, look, this is how it worked for me, maybe it'll be different for you. And then, these are sort of the advantages, disadvantages. And I think that really helped sort of our initial discussion, because then I didn't necessarily have to do like a hard sell, which I don't.
Right.
And I think it also gave you an idea of like, okay, yeah, this is something that could basically be real, as far as like one of the possibilities of like sort of another sort of tool to put in the toolkit on my destination, path to where I want to get. So yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think making the transition, um, I had a lot of audio background, audio knowledge, general understanding of fidelity, um, but there was an overwhelming amount to learn and to do, um, ranging from figuring out how to make a website and uh, ha- learning implementation stuff, which was uh, again, there's Unity, there's Unreal, there's Wise, there's Fmod, and then there's other stuff I don't know about.
Hmm.
And uh, so the school was, I think, really helpful in siloing things out and breaking them down a little bit, and allowing the sort of swirl of competing directions to settle down and just kind of follow the path as you had lined it out. And then I think from there, just being uh, consistent,
Hmm.
um, as much as possible in my own pursuit of the work, which was like seldom rewarding. Most of the time I would do a redesign, put it on Twitter, get a get some views, and then nothing would change.
Hmm.
And I had to accept the idea that um, I wasn't going to uh, do anything over the course of a week or a month or 2 months, even, really, that would make a huge difference in my pursuit of getting a job,
Hmm.
which was, again, my main goal. And I did do game jams, which are, where you show up
Hmm.
to a place and there's a variety of people there, developers and artists and programmers, um, and you collaborate on making a game. And another thing I did that I thought was very helpful for me was um, finding a variety of mentors, people who are working in game audio. People in game audio are very friendly. You mentioned the Italian friends at Game SoundCon. I can, to this day, we knew each other for 2 days, but I still have an ongoing Facebook relationship with people I met at that event. Um,
Hmm.
just and he was very encouraging. He'd always be like, "You can do this, man." When I was feeling down, um, but I would do these redesigns or do work and then show them to people that I had met, and try to, as respectfully of their time as I could, say, I'd love to hear your thoughts or your feedback, if you
Hmm.
have any. And oftentimes people would give me very specific, detailed suggestions about what to do. And whenever someone did that, I would try within 2 weeks to implement the changes that they had sent me, the suggestions they had made, and then send it back.
Yep.
And I feel like that pattern was really good for me in skill building, and I
Hmm.
think also very effective in my building of a reputation among a fairly small scene. Like the
Hmm.
game audio scene, people working full time in game audio is not that big.
Hmm.
And um, I think I was able to get to know a handful of people who were working in the business. And um, by the time after a little over a year and a half in, I started
Mhm.
actually getting some interview opportunities after applying to a lot of jobs.
Mhm.
Um, I often knew people who would be able to make a recommendation for me based on
Mhm.
having seen me consistently improving, consistently working, showing up to events, putting things out on Twitter, uh, either the Unreal or Wise things I did with the school, and also all the various redesigns that I was just doing on my own.
Yeah, like the spell book thing. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, the spell book. So that was I my producer alias when I was working music was Grey Goon, and so I kept that, which I think was maybe not a great idea in retrospect. I think I should have just probably used Doug Walters, sound designer.
Hmm.
Um, Now I'm sort of trapped in this weird in between zone. But anyhow, I created something I called the Grey Goon Spellbook, where I would take um, magical abilities from games, a single ice spear cast, and then film myself uh, recording source audio for that. I'd like squeeze a pine cone for an ice sound, and
Hmm.
was cutting Potter foam for slicing shard sound, et cetera, et cetera. Record aerosol spray can, um, and then string it together in uh, showing the source audio on video, and then the final result of where I ended up.
Hmm.
And I just tried to do that. I don't know how many I did in the end, 10 or so, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and just show the audio progression.
Hmm.
And ultimately, in the end, I think at Hexany, I had someone who had formerly worked there write a recommendation for me. Someone who was like fairly well known in the game audio scene write a recommendation. Someone who worked at a company that hired Hexany wrote a recommendation. Someone who had recently gotten hired uh,
Hmm.
at Hexany before me write a recommendation. So the
Nice.
networking clearly paid off in the end,
Hmm.
but none of those people who I had developed relationships with um, did I know ultimately what the payoff would be. It's just a
Yeah.
wide, persistent net.
Yeah. Yeah. It's often described as sowing seeds. Like you basically,
Sure.
create this, garden of opportunities, and then
Hmm.
basically create those, we'll see where this goes. And yeah, sometimes, whatever, you end up just hanging out kind of thing sometimes with certain people, and then other people, yeah, they end up being more industry contacts. And then of course, yeah, like having four people, that really does help your chances, because then that's sort of like, it's all those particular things, it's just like that particular company, came to fruition at that time. So yeah, that's quite cool. Did they get you to do like an audio test for Hexany?
I did. I did a sound test. I had a week. It was about a minute long gameplay.
Hmm.
It was during the week of the 2020 election, and I also found out my wife was pregnant during that week. So it was
Wow.
like a pretty stressful week for me.
Mm.
Um, and also, I think related to what I was saying about the sort of getting feedback and then implementing it, I did the sound test and then
Hmm.
had a follow up interview afterwards,
Hmm.
and that was with the owner, producer, and the audio lead, the sound design lead. Um, and I asked for feedback in that meeting on my sound test and got some. It wasn't like an extensive list, but I got some feedback. And then I implemented the feedback on my sound design test
Hmm.
and sent it to them 2 weeks later, saying I had been practicing some of the things you had mentioned and thought I would share with you what I'd done.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't, I mean, I'm not making that suggestion without, uh, as though that this is an obvious thing that you should do, but
Right.
it did happen. I mean, I got the job, so
Yeah.
maybe it was worthwhile for me in that particular case.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that similarly also reminds me of the process of Kaizen, where it's just the continual improvement. It's like polishing,
Mm.
basically, where you have a certain level and then you polish and polish and polish, and also the idea of just, yeah, iterative refinement through constructive, objective, and also subjective feedback in that loop too. So I guess what we'll do is we'll sort of say that as our first chunk of our talk here. And then what we'll do is that for folks that are joining us, please, if you go into the live event, it's hashtag, and then there's a red circle, live event chat, and then ask your questions there. And what I'll do, Doug, is that you can stay on your screen, and then I'll ask
Mhm.
you the questions. Audio wise, so that when hopefully the recording works, that it'll make some sense. So I'm gonna pop over here. Okay, so we've got a few people typing, madly typing. Okay. Yep. So, when making your transition towards working at Hexany, did you find that your linear work experience informed your approach to game audio work? That's from Anthony. He just recently finished his
Yeah,
demo reel. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think for sure. Partly just, you know, cleaning up sounds, even stuff from the library. Sometimes there's clicks in them, or there's, if you compress it enough, there's room noise. I think a lot of the things you're doing in DAW are pretty related to a lot of linear work. And then also, from a musical perspective, I think the first two assignments I did at Hexney as a sound designer were characters who had musical abilities. They had
Ah.
like magical instruments, and so um, having a musical background was helpful for sure to be able to, at the Plants Point audio lead was like, hey, when you're doing this, try to focus on doing like fifths or octaves or stuff that's not too melodic. And so having an understanding of, musical intervals was a useful thing. And then additionally, uh, I felt like my background was like pretty um, electronic musically. I've done a lot of rap production, and um, building out sound design to be powerful and punchy, and um, getting the impacts to cut through uh, and maintain clarity in a mix all felt very related to music production to me. Like a lot of the times I feel like the punchy stuff are my drum kit, and the ambience is the pads or something. I mean, it's not so one to one, but I definitely think the skills I developed in making and producing music, um, if you just kind of like shift your perspective a little bit, all of a sudden you're designing a fight scene in a video game.
Mm-hmm. I guess one thing that I have sort of more advanced students ask about is that punchiness thing. So, how do you consider, sort of the mix of your sound design when you're working to basically get punch? Do you do a lot of like volume automation? Do you, add like a lot of tracks? Do you throw away a lot of stuff? Do you sort of sketch things out? Like, what is sort of your process to creating like a fully sort of like mastered, really, final sort of sound design where it's just got that where it will really punch through the mix.
Sure. That there's a lot there for sure. Like that is, I feel like that is a big focus of how I'm trying to improve all the time. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
transient design,
Mm-hmm.
transients being like that initial punch of a momentary beginning of a sound is something we talk about and work on all the time at Hexany. Um, we definitely use a lot of transient designers, which will just accentuate the precise moments. Um, Sometimes I will just use a kick drum just
Mm-hmm.
as the initial punch of a sound, of a gun, even. Um, I tend to avoid stacking too many things on the initial transient You can
Mm-hmm.
even, if you give a space of a frame and you have the initial transient and then even the subsequent tonal, uh, another impactful sound, you're still like cutting through most significantly on that initial transient that hits. One trick that some of the cats at Hexany are doing that I haven't. So I work into a limiter on the
Mm-hmm.
master bus,
Yeah.
and I will pump a transient into that uh, aggressively,
Mm-hmm.
such that it's even ducking the other material.
Yep.
Um, so the other textural sounds might get turned down because a kick drum is so loud that that punch is cutting through and turning the other stuff down.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these dudes at Hexany will turn off the limiter and let it just clip digitally,
Mm-hmm.
and they're getting distortion, clip distortion, and exceeding the actual zero level output,
Yeah.
which just to this day I find like disconcerting. Um, but it sounds cool and it's punchy. You get sort of a nice sounding distortion. And
Mm-hmm.
um, another technique that we've started using recently is having a a track in the sound design. Well, so in Reaper, everything is sort of like constructed in folders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead of using buses a lot of the time, which is more how like Pro Tools or Logic would work,
Mm-hmm.
you can have a folder, a parent folder, and tracks inside of it that are all feeding into that parent folder.
Yep.
And so we will have a folder that will be key tracks, and that will be set up to sidechain the overall mix. Um, so if you really want something to cut through in the mix, either in a cinematic or in a just a single, attack animation sound,
Mm-hmm.
you can have those key pieces be sidechain compressing the
Yeah.
rest of the mix.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done
So
that.
it's effectively
Yeah.
turning it down as stuff is punching through.
Exactly. I just recently been working on a track that is not quite released yet, but when it is, yeah, I basically did that. It's a common thing with vocals, you know. It's sort of like
Sure.
where you're using the vocals to push down the other stuff. It doesn't have to push it down a lot. It's just giving enough space so that you're, yeah, whatever dialogue slash voice is often the focus. So, yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
musically, I would do it all the time. At like the bass, I would sidechain to the kick, so the kick is turning the bass drum down a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or even things like you have a lot of reverb on a guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the reverb itself sidechained by the guitar, so that like you can have this big washed out or delayed uh, effect channel, and then
Mm-hmm.
the actual um, performance notes will sidechain the reverb. So you maintain the wash. You can do this with vocals too, like washed out
Exactly.
vocal effect, and have
Mm-hmm.
the vocal itself, the primary uh, vocals sidechaining the effects, so that it's washed, but it'll cut as they actually
Yeah.
are performing.
Yeah, and I find within Reaper it's a lot easier to visualize that mix chain, like the way that the signal path, when you're doing multiple groups like that, where you've got like say you're doing that on the guitar, you're doing it on the vocals, whatever it may be, percussion, and then you're also doing that sort of side chaining idea at sort of like the master level as well, where you've got certain things that are sort of poking through at that level. But of course at some point, like the thing that I had issue with is you still have to mix it. So
Sure.
yeah, I'll get to the next question here. So Pietro is asking, I'd love to know anything about your experience with game jams. How did you choose them? What did you find helped you prepare? How did you find people to work with? And what were some examples of more surprising things that you did in a game jam? Basically, yeah, anything about your experience with game jams. And then, yeah, we got, please keep asking questions in the chat because, yeah, we've got a good amount of time. And yeah, we're be great to get more feedback from Doug here. So yeah, game jams.
Sure. I did it in a variety of ways. before the pandemic, I live near the University of South Carolina, or not South Carolina, Southern California,
Wow.
USC.
Yeah.
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 Uh, and there was a game jam there. It's like, I think it's a pretty big game development school. And there were like, I don't know, 70 people, I think, at
Wow. Yeah.
this jam. It was a big one.
Yeah.
And it was 2 days, 3 days. It was
Hmm.
72 hours. I think it was 3 days. And I just showed up with my computer and some stuff,
Hmm.
and uh, just introduced myself to random people. And I think that the organizers would put you in a group, but I was a little bit more proactive, trying to just meet folks and I don't know. I was a music producer for a long time, which is predominantly being an A&R in a lot of ways. You just got to find
Yeah.
people who you think are talented. So I kind of put on my A&R hat and was like, who are the kids who I think are going to make a cool game?
Yeah.
And try to get myself in their group. And at that game jam, and in actually all the game jams I've done, I did both music and sound design. So it's pretty intense a lot of the time. You know,
Mm.
you're kind of staying up late and writing a lot of music potentially and doing a lot of sound design. Um, and I tried to be somewhat proactive without being annoying towards the developers. You know, when they're saying like, "Oh, I'm working on this thing," be like, "Do you think that needs sound?"
Hmm.
But not hovering, or because ultimately the sound is not as important to them.
Yeah.
Sound is sound is important to us, and I think it's important to a gameplay experience. But the people who are really building the game, it's definitely secondary. So
Hmm.
I think understanding that in the interactions, and that trying to be sort of patient and get in where you fit in, I think is pretty important. Um, and then I've also done jams online, um, over a longer period of time, and in sort of a similar fashion. For those, often it was with people I had met on Twitter, game developers I'd met on Twitter,
Oh, okay.
who I was interested in working on their main game, or we had been working together on their game, um, and they were decided to do a jam and invited me to participate. Um, but so I don't have a lot of advice about sort of the online jams with strangers.
Hmm.
I definitely think it's possible, and uh, I would maybe, in terms of surprises or what to expect, I I didn't have any bizarre experiences. Um, I
Hmm.
was working with, college kids, so at one point somebody stayed up late and then overslept and didn't show up at, when we had agreed to meet up, and
Yeah.
appeared several hours later. So, but again, I'd been working with 20-year-old rappers for like the past 10 years, so I was not surprised by any of this.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think, yeah, keep your expectations fairly low. Go
Hmm.
into it with the idea that you could have a difficult or unsatisfying experience, and you might have a really cool, fun end result. And I think
Hmm.
that is sort of the advice I would give: is uh, go in ready to work hard and make something cool, but don't put all your eggs in a single game jam.
Yeah, nice. One question that comes up with game jams is, did you just do content or did you do any implementation stuff? So.
I pretty consistently did content.
Hmm.
I think I did a little bit of Unity work, mixing,
Hmm.
but in most, so the online stuff, he that developer was working in Defold,
Hmm.
so I didn't really have the know-how to do a lot of actual implementation in it.
Hmm.
I do think it's potentially possible and helpful to get involved in the version control and actually be like working with the GitHub and even potentially connecting Wise. But
Mm-hmm.
I also think the uh, time crunch is such that it sometimes feels like adding greater difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when most developers are pretty familiar with looping music or loading a sound, like
Mm-hmm.
they, if they're at a game jam, a lot of the time they have made games themselves and are familiar with how to put a sound in and do that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think if it's a longer jam or if you're pretty confident in your implementation skills, I think it's great. And I think similar to what I was saying earlier, it's like uh, understand the priorities of the people you're working with and try to work around them. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like you doing the implementation is feels helpful to them
Mm-hmm.
or is moving things forward, then adjust.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's quite typical with audio where it's a support type role, and it's good to sort of see, how that works in the process with game jams. Our next question here is from Ninja52 5. What are the benefits of working at a specialized audio team like Hexany in compared to working in-house? If you can answer that one, I mean, maybe we can double team that, and you can talk about Hexany, and I can talk a little bit about in-house, unless you've done in-house, with a game company.
Not familiar with in-house, but I do feel like I have a sense of what I'm getting out of being at Hexany. I do not do a lot of implementation,
Mm-hmm.
so I think there's a little bit of a downside in terms of personal growth that um, I don't have. I've used Wise a couple times, and I've like sat with a technical sound designer while putting things in Unreal, and understanding how it all works is vital.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the trade-off is that I am I'm at the audio gym pumping iron all day,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
uh, and I am doing swords. I'm doing guns. I'm doing UI. I'm doing casino sound effects. I've done cars. I've done a huge amount of ambience. I've done like 120 bullet casings falling on the ground on different materials.
Yep.
Um, and the turnover is fast,
Mm.
and I am just improving very quickly with great mentors who I can ask questions to, a great team that I can learn from. And we are just very focused on the audio quality and improving our sound design chops.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is, I don't know how present that is in a in an actual studio, but my sense is that the pace of turnover um, and the kind of hyper focus on just turning out great assets quickly is um, really good for my skill level, my diversity of experience, and um, is like a really awesome way for me to enter the game industry. Uh, I think just like with a kind of rocket propulsion in terms of improving my sound
Mm-hmm.
design, while missing out, I think, on on the implementation side.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the bigger things with working in a AAA studio. I mean, I've worked at EA, Radical, and Black Box, and anyways, other studios. What tends to happen is that it's kind of nice because you get involved, hopefully, with audio at pre-production, where you can actually help define some of the game in on the game audio side, the actual, the design, and you get to sit there with the designers and the team, and there's a lot of attention that gets actually goes into the whole game audio process at that point and the overall design of the game, which can be really difficult if you're basically working in audio post. Like, one of the things that, Randy, Tom, and others have been really sort of advocating is the idea of getting audio in earlier. And that's something that I'm sure at Hexany that they really do like when they get asked by a developer to come in earlier. But of course, they're AAA, content provider, and they're expensive. And a lot of studios are just like, well, if we bring you in at that point, we're going to have an extra, our burn rate goes up as far as what goes into audio, because sure, we will get maybe some more wins with audio, but then also, yeah, like it's an expensive process. Whereas if you have those people on staff to begin with, you're already paying them. And so it's one of those, it's sort of a different thing there, is that you get involved throughout like the entire process, which can be good, but also it can also be difficult, because sometimes I just had a student that yeah, she's starting a 3 to 4 year dev cycle. So those kind of things, that's like it requires a certain amount of consistency and persistence too. So anyways, that's a little comment at the end there. I'll try another question here. Okay, what tips do you have in general when working on sound tests? Ooh, this is a good one. Sound tests. How do you go about organizing your time when you've got multiple tasks to complete, etc.? So that's from Tom. And yes, please continue to ask questions. We've still got time.
Sure. Um, I think my understanding, at least at Hexany, is that the sound test is by far the most important part of your application.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that, most everything else you're doing around that is just like providing some context for your sound test, which, if it's the best, will get you the job, I think, is more or less how it goes. So my advice would be to take it very seriously. If you really think you have a shot at the job, um, make it a priority. And I, when I had my interview, they asked me how long I had spent on my sound test,
Yeah.
and I kind of guessed and said, you know, 20 some odd hours.
Right.
And they were like, "Oh," as though that were maybe a little bit long of an amount of time. So I think I would, I think it could be helpful to downplay the amount of time if you do get asked that in the interview
Yeah.
afterwards.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Um, I also got lost trying to do some like Foley recording during my own thing. So I was, at the time I had a, well, like I said, it, I found out my wife was pregnant during that week, so like I
Yeah.
was pretty distracted. Um, but I I tried to just put in a chunk of time where I just cut everything else out as much as I could and worked on it and tried to be consistent and um, finish coverage
Hmm.
uh, pretty far ahead of time. That's just generally how I work. I think is I try
Right.
to get the whole thing
Hmm.
covered and then cycle back and do detail improvement, detail improvement, detail improvement,
I was going to
knowing that
ask.
I have
Yep.
the overall project done, because I feel like it just gives you a lot more comfort
Hmm.
to feel like the detail work um, isn't keeping you from completing the project. If you feel
Hmm.
like you've done the overall thing, you've gotten the coverage, the ambience, the footsteps, the general, whatever
Hmm.
is largely covered, then going back and replacing things, improving the mix, working on detail feels a lot better. And I think
Hmm.
there's a lot more ability to focus on quality, knowing that there's at least a full version that's
Hmm.
done.
One thing that I've done sometimes is to sort of do a needle drop analogy, where because sometimes my ears can get tired re-listening to the same thing, especially if it's a few seconds of sound design, and to actually just jump in part way through and start from there and then go to the end of it. And that way I've found that with my own stuff, that sort of iterative polishing, it's a little bit more evenly distributed, because sometimes if you're always starting from the beginning, then it'll sound good at the beginning, but as it continues,
Mm.
depending on the scope, it can be quite difficult to do a longer piece, similar to music. Then you have to think more compositionally. How do you, basically continue to hold attention and stuff like that. So with sound design, I've found that that's worked for me, is to try to not always start at the beginning and when I'm doing those passes basically.
Yeah, I think taking breaks is vital,
Yeah.
and I think also listening to references, find something similar
Mm-hmm.
and listen to that, and then come back and think about how yours is stacking up. And I also think it's helpful to they've chosen what they've chosen for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think trying to analyze to a certain extent, if you were going to make a checklist of 5 to 10 things, if you were going to review this for someone else, like, uh, what do you think this sound test is looking at? Is it looking at a dynamic transition? Is it looking at ambience? Is it looking at um, punchiness or vibe, or is it pretty abstract? So they're at, I think just trying to take a step back and think, if I were the person, if I were like a robot, trying to do a driver's ed exam test of what
Mm.
this is achieving or not achieving.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be kind of helpful to get a zoomed out view of whether or not you're actually succeeding on the test side of it.
Mm-hmm. Did you have anybody review? Like, I don't know if you want to necessarily say that, but do you think it might be something to, like, whatever, basically send it to a few folks before handing it in, or were you more just like, didn't you just got it done and needed to get it in?
I think that it's pretty common to get
Mm-hmm.
some feedback
Cool.
on
Yep.
your sound test.
Yep. Yeah. I think
I
that
think it's
that's
probably not something you want to divulge in your interview,
that's why I
but
was sort of hedging there. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
will hedgingly say I think it's probably a
Mm-hmm.
smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think so as well, because sometimes, yeah, it's just hard. Like you say, on one hand, you're saying, be intensely focused on it, but then also take breaks, but then also have, like, be able to stand back from it, but then also be into it. And it can be very difficult to do that when you're under, like you were, a lot of stress, and to be able to actually keep, like, an objective focus. And so it's good to get help, basically, because the thing is that you're capable of whatever doing the work. It's just it's a very yeah, it's a stressful thing. And honestly, I believe that that process of getting external help actually mirrors what you're going to be doing in the
Yeah,
development environment anyways, because you're not just going to be sending stuff directly to the client. It's just like, oh, actually, you'll have your superiors have a look at a lot of the stuff that you'll be submitting, especially at the beginning anyways. So I think that that process is if I was Hexany or whomever, I've also hired people in the past as well. And yeah, that's totally fine. The idea is that obviously you have to be the one doing the work, but besides that, the being as yeah, like, I don't know, basically showing your best self in that instance is the way to do it. So
yeah, and I
yeah.
think you're exactly right that, like, graciously taking feedback and being able to uh, implement that feedback, and the not just the specific words they said, but the um, uh, I don't know, the spirit of the feedback
Mm-hmm.
is, like, vital to this
Mm-hmm.
work. It is collaborative. It's an entry level position. Someone's going to be telling you to change something, to improve something, and being able to hear that and
Mm-hmm.
do it um, in a way that actually does improve it
Yeah.
is fundamental.
And that honestly is a very mature skill to have when people are starting out. And it's very, yeah, it's just hard from a personal development standpoint to on one hand be confident about your work, but then also be able to actually internalize criticism, and to be able to go like, yeah, okay, this is something that I need to work on. I'm going to get better at that. And so it's a while teaching, I find it's a very delicate process to try to tell people like, hey, what you've done here is great, but to actually push it a little bit further, you might try this. And some people
Sure.
respond to that better than others. But when you get into the industry, It can be, well, science shows that basically when people are starting out, it's much better to give sort of, supportive feedback. Whereas when you progress further down your career and sort of, your maturity in your craft, then it's more objective feedback that people are looking for, where it's just like, this is the thing that you should be doing here to really dial it up a notch. So that's something that happens over time. And yeah, I think that that's also something that, whatever, probably employers see, people that are hiring with people with their sound test is where they give the feedback. And then depending on the response, like you had the response of like actually, not just like internalizing it, but actually actualizing the feedback
Mhm.
and putting it in there and going like, yeah, this is, I not only heard what you said, I understood it, and I did the thing, which I think is, yeah, that's something that not everybody can do, and but that is really what is kind of required at the end of the day by most studios. Like once people really start getting going with game audio, is that yeah, you have a high level of craft, but then also a high level of being able to be able to make quick changes that don't include a lot of ego. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, like that
Mm,
process of seeking feedback and working on
mm-hmm,
my stuff was how I learned to do this at all. Like
mm-hmm,
I was not good enough when I started. And I would send it to people who worked in the industry and they would give me feedback.
mm-hmm.
And there's an impulse to want to explain why you did what you did and be like, "Oh, like I put a lot of thought into this and the
Yeah,
reason it sounds that way is because of XYZ." And like that's not that's not helpful.
yeah.
Like
It's
you
a
take the
great
feedback,
point.
you you say like, "Okay, they know more than me." You're humble. Maybe you are confident enough to say, I actually think what I did is right for a reason, but don't
Mm-hmm.
explain it." And
Yeah.
I think that process of just taking the feedback, doing it again, trying to learn from it, being humble and accepting that like I can improve every step of the way. I think that was like that attitude and that habit was
Mm-hmm.
probably the thing that allowed me to improve enough to the point where I did a sound test that got me the job.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly the thing. And yeah, it's not. It's honestly, it's something that usually happens over time. I find it's yeah, some people have it to begin with, but yeah, the and I've honestly like my own personality. I can be, more so in the past. I've been more defensive, where I'm just like, oh, I've done
Mhm.
this and I've done this, and like, blah 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 blah. And I think one way of reframing it, if you are like me, is to also go like, well, it's not just necessarily that somebody knows more than you do. They just know different things, because a lot of the times they can actually learn from you. I learn a lot from my students, but
Mhm.
I do know more than them in certain ways, but also we just know different things. So that's part of the reason why I really love doing the school, is that I learn a lot from students like all the time, and it keeps it fresh. As far as my own sort of, yeah, I don't know. I like meeting new people, going to new places, doing new things, learning new things, and yeah, it's a huge part of it. So yeah, we'll do. I think we'll have one or two more questions here. So let's have a look. I'm gonna scroll over here. So yes, James asks, what is your sound design workflow process when creating a sound? For instance, how would you go about making a fire spell sound? Just curious about your overall process. And thanks for sharing.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, James. I think that depending on how much time I have,
Mm-hmm.
my process will vary. And um, if I have little time, I look in libraries and try to find stuff that is close. And I might watch or look for some references, or I have some in my head about fire. Fire is interesting because it's very noisy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different sort of qualities of it. There's like a sparky high end type of thing, or there's just a there's a jet fuel kind of rumble. So I would decide in my head uh, what type of fire sound I'm trying to look for. Um, at Hexany, and I think in game audio generally, currently there's an emphasis on tonality over noise. Um, and exactly what that means is like complicated to parse out. But I would say in general, it's um, you know, rather than having just like a broad frequency spectrum, it's got more emphasized fundamental and harmonics, I guess. But so I would, if I had the time, I would start with creating some source potentially, which might mean starting with a library and then tweaking it in ways that I think might be cool, using flangers or phaser type stuff to create more motion, maybe tremolo, looking for something that is a little bit more active in the sound rather than just a consistent fire sound. I would try to get something a little more distinct or hyper real out of it. And um, and then after maybe drawing some source together, I would think about the sequence, the storytelling that is going on,
Mm-hmm.
what the action is, where the entry point of the fire spell takes place, where the tail is, what's going on in the middle, and often I will try to overemphasize a transient moment in a spell cast. So perhaps the actual cast spell itself will have more of a boom than you might otherwise experience in a real a real spell.
Right.
Uh,
Yes.
and so I would do like a moment of impact or transient or casting, and then the tail would sort of have fire stuff, but it might have other things that are a little bit synthesized or um, not explicitly fire-ish sound
Mm-hmm.
to create a little more interest. And then I just try to pay close attention to the detail of the video. And if there's like particle animation of sparks, I try to get sparks. If there's smoke at the end, I'll try to get some kind of air noisy wafting, and really pull out the details of what's going on screen and incorporate that in what I'm doing. Um, and yeah, I feel like, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
that's, I don't know that I have a workflow that is explicit in how I approach things. I think I'm kind of just like a let's get into it type of person. But I think generally finding source um, and then paying attention to key moments, um, focusing on the actual visuals,
Mm-hmm.
and then carving it out based on those key moments and the visuals is my approach.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I'm just gonna double check the chat here to see if there's anything. Oh, sorry. I think I missed Abhishek's question here. Okay. I think this is yeah, one I think this is it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so yeah, basically the question is, are there any guidelines you would follow when someone else is implementing your sound design? Like basically, how would you work with someone else that's implementing your sound design?
Yeah, that is mostly how we at Hexany are working a lot of the time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
specifically, that's how I'm working all the time. Because
Mm-hmm.
even if we're doing the implementation in house, I'm just giving it to the technical sound designer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the majority of character ability stuff, either first person character or NPC character, is implemented through animation. So uh, a player hits a button or something is triggered and the animation starts.
Mhm.
And so typically I try to design the audio to start when the animation happens. And if you scrub slowly in a DAW, you can usually see they're standing this way,
Mhm.
whatever, and then their hand goes like this, and this is the beginning of the animation.
Mhm.
And so you start your audio there, and that is often the easiest way for the implementer to see where it starts. We also always export videos along
Mm.
with our audio of
Mhm.
a video clip, so you can see the actual audio matching the video. And Reaper
Mhm.
makes this very easy. Um, I think that's one of the dominant ways I think to communicate effectively over where audio begins. If you can just see it and see how it's supposed to work. And then uh, oftentimes we send the audio to the implementer when we're doing working with someone in house, and then they take a capture in game and send it back to us for
Mhm.
review to make sure the timing is working and that the dynamics will often dynamics and the frequency balance will change when it's in game.
Mhm.
Um, because once it's in engine, it may not be directly 2D. It's happening, in the 3D environment. Um, so the capture for review is very helpful. Um, so yeah, I think, and then communicating about variations, I think, is
Mhm.
helpful. Understanding uh, how many variations would be you think will be useful or they think will be useful, and who is determining that. I think definitely also naming conventions
Mhm.
is super helpful and important. Decide beforehand how you want to name stuff and how you're going to describe variations, underscore O1, underscore O2, and then um, being consistent
Yeah.
is, I think, really important. Um, I don't know, Leonard, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I've done a fair amount of technical audio work as well as sound design, music type stuff. And I've just thought, actually, I think that, do you work with Owen Cooper? He's
Yeah. Mhm.
apparently, yeah, he's a technical
Yeah,
sound
Owen's my
designer. Cool, because yeah, he was another, grad of the School of Video Game Audio. So it seems Hexany's grabbing a few different people. And then also, yeah, there is there's yeah, with Power Up they actually have a student as well.
mm,
I think Cole's working there. So yeah,
your
there's
tentacles are spreading throughout the industry.
yeah, doing all right. Yeah, I guess it's how do you say success by attrition of other people that
Sure.
haven't continued as long as I have. But yeah, as far as those things, I guess the variation stuff, like, do you typically play the game, or is it more where you kind of get someone else that's offline to, like, send you gameplay video and you don't really have to deal with the build of the game where you're working at Hexany currently?
We do a little bit of both. The
Mm.
majority of stuff we do, people are
Mm-hmm.
sending us spreadsheets uh, where they have specified specs about the audio,
Mm-hmm.
and they've given us videos to show the um, animation clip of the ability,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll give us the name that they want to use and the number of variations. So a lot of times we're sort of just taking this spreadsheet, and we have systems to kind of like get that imported into Reaper across markers and then get all the video clips in, and then we kind of like go piece by piece. In other instances where we are doing the implementation, or Owen is doing the implementation,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I will we will potentially play the game, figure out what is needed. Um, I might, walk down to. We've done some play tests also, where you get to actually play the game, hear your stuff in game, see what's working, what's not working,
Mm-hmm.
and then get captures of an ability. Take it back to the DAW, design the sound, take
Mm-hmm.
it back to Owen, who puts it in the engine. Um, Figure out what needs to loop and when things should trigger and how it's all working. Whether if a sound is just happening too many times in the
Mm.
game, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, cool
Um,
offs and stuff like that, I guess too.
sure. Mhm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but sort of variety of different ways. But ultimately, for what I do, I end up working to a video in a DAW,
Mm-hmm.
designing a sound. Um, and I'm not usually the person who's deciding how many variations of a thing are needed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think partly that's the structure of like Hexany's billing system, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think it's not as often the case that it's sort of carte blanche, like bill us whatever you want. You know, it's more
Yeah.
like this is the amount of things we're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, some outsourcing companies do work that way, where they, especially if they're, well, on the tech side, they might honestly do that, where they might bill, maybe they bill Owen out at an hourly,
Mm,
because sometimes it's very difficult to know until you get into the code and other things like how long the tech integration is going to go. And I've definitely worked on projects like that in the past. I worked on one called Monster Lab. Years ago, it was at Backbone, and with that, I was an independent contractor, and I basically got the contract handed over to me, and I was doing sound design stuff. But then, so the sound design, there was a fixed budget for that, whatever dollars per sound effect, and then on the other side, doing the implementation, that one was getting billed out as an hourly, but with a cap, of course. And so yeah, it depends. There's all sorts of different ways to do it, and yeah, the technical side, it's interesting to see how different companies do that. Either be it AAA in-house or like indie, or or working sort of outsource
right.
stuff, or whatever it is. It is kind of can be a little bit frustrating maybe explaining to students sometimes, where it's just like, hey, what am I going to be doing? And it's just like, well, I'm going to try and give you as many tools as possible so that you can survive, hopefully, or at least sort of be able to rapidly adapt to whatever scenario you find yourself in. So it's cool to hear more details about how Hexany happens to work, because that I've never worked. I've never worked, yeah, like at a company, like just an audio company like that. But those companies, there's one here called Lion's Head. They work with some of the local developers. They work a lot of Gears of War and those kind of titles and stuff. So, and obviously Power Up is here too.
Right.
So
My friend at Power Up, we compared notes one time,
mhm,
and I think our experiences are super different. Um,
there you
in
go.
that they are almost always working on full development. They're basically like
Hmm.
I think the majority of the time they are the audio team for an indie game, and
Hmm.
they are much more involved in the design process and the development, and I think the start to end. And
Hmm.
Hexney is so much of the time providing assets and sending them over the fence.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, even just sort of in pretty comparable style businesses,
Yeah.
business model and the workflow are quite different.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Well, I guess what we'll do is we'll sort of end things there as far as our, discussion, because we could talk for a long time.
Yeah,
There's I mean, game audio. There's so much to it, and yeah, there's there's so many. Yeah, there's like a limitless amount of different ways to approach things, and obviously, it's great that you're able to say a bit about your creative process, and then also like obviously your business process or your career path. And yeah, it was great for you to be able to join us for, and that's another thing, is that you're able to join us for three of our full courses, and then you also did all like the add-ons, which is
hmm
great. And that's something that when people are really looking to do that transition, they're just like, hey, can I take your course and just take the Wise course? And I'm like, well, yes, you can, but like yourself, Sabrina, and there's other people as well that have taken all, whatever the courses that we have to offer. It's basically, to me, it's just like it's another tool in the toolkit that will allow you
sure.
to hopefully continue to be able to adapt to things. So yeah, as far as the school, I mean, I'm very glad that you were able to sort of give some insight into how yeah, like our students can sort of make a similar transition, and that they were able to basically, take some of your time, especially at this very interesting time in your life, to ask you these
Sure, yeah.
questions. And I guess what we'll do is we can continue the sort of chat discussion for whatever. I don't know if we'll be doing it for a long time like live, but I think if it's okay, then you can post your details into the live event chat, and people can
Mhm.
see, like you were mentioning, that you wanted to post some links and stuff like that. And then maybe you can follow up with some people, as long as people are how do you say, sensitive to your time and stuff like that. So yeah,
Sure,
really,
totally. Yeah.
yeah.
And folks can feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat. I am having my wife and I are having our first baby like next week, literally. So I may not be as available as I typically otherwise would be. But yeah, feel free to reach out and or even follow up if I don't immediately respond. I think
Hmm.
it's a part of the game is hitting people up and being unabashed, kind of.
Hmm. Perfect. All right. Cool. Well, we'll wrap it up there. So yeah, thanks again, Doug. It's been awesome to chat and to hear your insights, and to get the answers to those burning questions that people have. And yeah, I guess as far as looking up more information about the school, just look it up at sovga.com. And yes, come to the Discord. I don't have a link for it, but if you look at sovga.com, there's like a Discord thingy, and then you can just do invite, and then you can get yourself to here in case you're looking at a recording of this. So, yeah, cool. And thanks everybody, of course, for asking questions and for joining in. That's awesome. Thanks so much. So, yeah, thanks again, Doug.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool. All right. Ciao,
Take
everyone.
it easy.
So, yeah, come on into the chat, and then you can say hi and stuff like that. So, well, bye bye for now.